Hey everyone, it's Josh, J Vintage Honda Minis, Orlando, Florida. This video we're going to talk about tanks, steel tanks for these bikes such as the KO through K2 Z50s and K3 and above, Z50s, Z50Rs, ATC 70s, SL70s, all these motorcycle frames with their tank that mounts to the frame. So this bike is getting restoration work and I have a paint job. But I had an issue initially with processing the tank, so I'm just gonna kind of go through what you guys should do before you even get to the paint stage. You need to thoroughly test these tanks out to prevent any issues with the tank leaking or weeping on you after paint, because if you get paint that's going to get behind that new gas that's going to weep out and get behind that new paint job, it's going to bubble up on you and you're going to have a disaster. Alright, so what we're looking at here is a problematic tank. So I initially would start with a tank cleaning of the inside of the tank, just to pre-clean before we start the process for painting. And in that process of doing that, I noticed some weep issues that were breaking through the seams on the bottom of the tank. I was going to do my own pressurized tank testing here. So I'm going to show you guys the simple requirement and the tools or parts that are needed to do a pressurized tank test, because I don't want anyone to bring their tank to paint and then find out after that you got some holes in it. So let's get at it. Let's show you kind of what will be needed to pressurize the tank, and I'll show you the parts and pieces needed to do that. Alright, so the first thing you're going to need is some form of machinery that's going to get you pressurized air to do this test. So I have an air compressor. Some of you guys, I'll even go a step further and make a little setup that will work off a bicycle pump. So I'll show you both ways. You got an air compressor, we'll do it that way. If you don't have access to that, I would hope you guys have at least a bicycle pump, and I'll show you how to make some parts that will help you pressurize your tank off the basic bicycle type pump. Alright, so the next material is a dip tank of some form. This one is actually a cement mixing plastic container that you can get up at Home Depot. I think it was $5 to $7 for this one. It's large enough for me to put my tank into it, a Z50 tank that is. Or just get yourself a plastic tote that you can fill with water and have a larger tank. You can even use a 5-gallon Home Depot or Lowe's bucket, but I like to be able to have more surface area to look at my tank instead of having to dip it in vertically. Alright, for me, I'm using an old petcock that is obviously right size for the Z50 KO through K2 tanks. So if you got a petcock, just go ahead and use that over again. Put some Teflon tape on all the seals, because this is areas that you're going to have some leaking if you don't have some tape there under pressure. So go ahead and use your petcock, or you'll just have to come up with a alternate option. I think this is a M12 by 1.0 thread on the actual bottom nipple here on this tank. So go ahead and get that, and then you're going to want some of your gas line, a lead from that petcock to plug in whatever apparatus you're using to pressurize your tank. I'll show you what I'm going to use. So the next couple parts you're going to want is a worm clamp for the top fill spout, and some butyl rubber, which I got from a tire tube. And this is just a cheap tube that I bought from Harbor Freight for like $3 or $4 from a small package. And so I cut the butyl rubber to use at the top, and then what I'm going to use for access to using a bike pump is I'm going to take their valve and put the adapt the hose to the petcock to pressurize it with this valve here. This is for a bike pump or hand pump of some sort, but we'll get to that when I show you how to use a hand pump. For right now, I'm set up to use the compressor. Just so you guys will cut this rubber right from the tube, just cut it at least a 3-inch diameter, and that will be sufficient to cover the gas fill port and wrap around for the worm clamp to hold it in place. Alright, so you're definitely going to want a regulator on the air compressor. So I have a separate regulator for the end of my hose, and this is a Harbor Freight part. I'll put some stuff in the link on the bottom of the video summary so you guys can at least see the parts and pieces that I'm using. So I got something to regulate my pressure. You don't want to over pressurize the tank. I'm going to keep my pressure 5 pounds and below on the regulator. Then you need some form of an air blow tool. I got a couple different variations, but they both will work with the fuel line. This one has the ribbed front piece that will hook onto the fuel line at the petcock, or this one actually is small enough to fit into the fuel line also. These are both, I believe this is definitely Harbor Freight. This one is, I don't know where I got this, but Harbor Freight probably sells something similar to that. So now we're at the point where we're using our air compressor setup, and I'm just gonna again set the regulator for about 5 pounds or less, based on the Harbor Freight. You know, it's I got it set at a little bit over the 0 hash mark, so safe to go. And then, like I said, the air gun, the blow gun here, will fit into the fuel line, standard size fuel line. And then what you're just going to do is set your tank under water and fill it. Now what I want us to focus on is this area right here on the seam. You can see that there's some bubbles. So this tank was repaired by the owner at his shop, and he was saying that everything was good to go to get it painted, but I just wanted to double check it for him. So actually I'm seeing that I got a couple areas here that you won't find. Now when I originally cleaned this tank out with Evaporust, I wasn't leaking from any of these points. But now that you see that it's got some pressure in it, we're finding all the problem spots on this tank. So I got a weep hole in the back area and a pretty good leaker here on the front. Alright, so we're going to go into version setup 2 with the hand pump or bicycle pump. So there's your valve from the tube. I had to that little rubber's glued on to this valve end here, so I had to use a little bit of a grinder to get back down to the brass metal, so it could fit into the it will actually, if this is not old and rigid, if it's pliable, you can still fit this tube or this valve into that tube. So I'm going to actually add a worm clamp to it also to make sure it doesn't pop off on me. Now I got my bicycle pump hooked up. This is probably a safer method so you don't over pressurize your tank, as opposed to a compressor with a regulator. It might get a little more PSI than what your regulator shows, but this is a pretty safe method with the bicycle pump. So anyways, we'll show how it's also very effective. So I'll just put it underwater, and I'm just going to give my hand pump a few pumps, and you'll see just off a couple pumps. Hey man. Yes sir, thank you. So we're getting our bubbles here again. It already dissipated, so like I said, it's not over pressurizing a tank. Just all it takes is just a little bit of pressure, maybe 1 to 2 pounds of pressure, and we're getting our leaks. Alright, so that's going to conclude just pressurizing your tank and leak testing it, so you don't end up having an expensive mistake. I'm going to put a video together on how to clean the tank out, what I use to clean them, and I'm actually making a tumbler, another tumbler, which is going to tumble my tanks, gas tanks, with abrasives such as nuts and bolts, or you can buy some specialty tumbler abrasives that will clean the tank out, because I'm going to show a chemical way of cleaning the tanks out, and then also a mechanical way, but I'm going to make a tumbler that I can just leave and let it run and tumble my gas tanks for me. I'm showing you like a more advanced level polishing techniques and the tools and products that I use to accomplish that. If you guys don't subscribe, please subscribe. Help me hit that 1,000 subscription mark. That's my goal for now. obviously, to get to that area and then keep growing it. But please subscribe if you don't. If you do, thank you. Much more content to come. Lots of helpful tips for you guys when building these Hondas. I do it all day long, so I kind of get to troubleshoot what works best, and then I'm sharing that stuff with you guys. So anyways, thanks for watching.